more because I just didn't realize Dick Cheney was from Wyoming. Cheers. Just made some nice little hot chocolate as we're gonna do kind of a sit down talk that is not scripted at all. It's just gonna be me talking because this video is going to be going up on December 4th, which will be the 2-year anniversary of my maternal grandfather's passing. Y'all may remember I was doing Vlogmas during that time, and I was recounting as it was kind of the last days and my emotions, and then also going through some of the early stages of mourning and grief, especially because I was grieving a relationship that I had always wanted, but never got, because as one of my siblings put it, he was not an easy man to love or be loved by. It's not that he was like abusive or anything. He was just a very stubborn man who at points had his feelings hurt and decided to not talk to people for a while. He and my mother did not really talk for many years per his decision. She also didn't talk to him, from what I understand, for periods of time either. At a younger point, they always had kind of a contentious relationship. And I thought in this, I would talk more about grandparents first to tear up. It's a hard one because this year, back in May, I lost my final grandparent. When I was born, all 4 of my grandparents were alive. Heck, even one of my great-grandmothers was alive. And a couple of like great uncles, like my great grandmother's brother was still alive when I was born. My first grandparent to passed when I was only about 16 months old. She had gotten, it was my maternal grandmother. When back in the 80s, she'd had to go in for surgery and it required blood transfusions. Well, those blood transfusions had hepatitis C, and while due to the medication due to the nature of the surgery she had, it required her to then be on Tylenol. So combination of Tylenol and unknown hepatitis C caused failure of the liver. And she was not eligible for a liver transplant, which for those who are of age, please sign up to be an organ donor. The more possibilities, the better. And also with liver donation, you can be a live liver donor. So please, I think a lot of my life would have been different if my grandmother had still been alive. I think my relationships with family members would be very different if she was still here. Even if she'd lived another 5-10 years. Because after her passing, she was my mom's best friend. After her passing, things got hard for family relationships. And so I didn't really know her that well. I mean, I didn't know her at all. I only also had one photo of the 2 of us, and that's it, with also my grandfather. But it was that, when I found that photo, I was so excited. I was probably about 17 when I found it. And yeah, it made me feel really good. I think about it because my mom has said I look so much like her. I look like her, I sound like her. There was somebody who actually knew my grandmother and commented that I walked like her. So I've thought about that a lot. I knew this was gonna happen, but I just wanted to, I don't know, I've been thinking about it a lot because, like I said, I've lost all of them now. And then you think about the time that you could have spent with them. The more time. The second grandparent to pass was a lot later. It was after my first year of graduate school. My paternal grandfather, I mean, he was already well into his 90s. We celebrated his 90th birthday in 2017, summer 2017, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. His birthday's end of August, but we ended up having to push it 6 weeks early, not because we were worried about his health or something. It was because my cousin's wedding was actually the same weekend as my grandfather's birthday, and the earlier weeks before that in Wyoming were like frontier days, and Cheyenne is a very common stopping spot as those who are going to Sturgis.
Also, the solar eclipse was going through Casper, Wyoming.
So we had to push back 6 weeks because he's Irish Catholic. And so we had a lot of family members who wanted to be there. It was enormous. We took up one hotel, really. That was a fun one. That was another one where, like I said, my mom always says I looked like my maternal grandmother. My dad, everybody told me I looked like my dad, like most between me and my siblings. And I laugh at that, and with my mother, I'm just like, so you married somebody who was a pilot like your father, but looks like your mother. She kind of appreciated that one. After that point, about 2019, he had started to have like medical problems. In November that year, he'd had a stroke, like a mini stroke. And the thing that had scared us all was the fact that he couldn't do numbers anymore. And he'd been an accountant his entire life. He'd even been the accountant for like Board of Education for Wyoming, and to the point where he knew Dick Cheney, which I was like, what? More because I just didn't realize Dick Cheney was from Wyoming. That was the first problem. And so I got to see him in December of that year. My dad and I, when I came home from school, he booked me a last minute ticket so I could also go up to visit my grandpa. I got to surprise them, actually. I think they appreciated that one. And he was able to join for a Zoom call after I'd graduated college, but because it was 2020 and we were cautious because he was starting to have like lung issues too. He was never good with his balance, and then towards the end his blood pressure started to get really bad in terms of the reverse. Instead of having high blood pressure like he'd had most of his adult life, he then started to have like dangerously low blood pressure, especially when he'd stand up, and so that would cause fainting spells. It ended up being July of 2021 that he was put on hospice. He was able to hospice at home, but it was bad. Or it wasn't even bad. He was mostly fine. Just at that point, they were like not going to do anything crazy. He was heading towards the end. I remember a friend had been like, oh, are you planning to go see that, like be there? And I was like, there's nothing for me to like do. I have to do work here, and if I get told I need to be out there, I will, but I'm not going to, this is something that for the adults, this is something for my dad and his siblings to deal with. Not to deal with, but to be there and decide on. So most of that summer I was spent a little bit on edge. Didn't help that my maternal grandfather ended up breaking his hip only a week after my other grandfather was put on hospice. My poor advisor came back from his Disney World vacation with me in absolute tears, having to go through both of that. I dealt with grief and mourning multiple times, but this felt a little different. And then my grandfather ended up passing. He made it for my cousin's, he didn't make it to my cousin's wedding, but he made it past my cousin's wedding, past one of the great grandkids' birthdays, and he passed 2 days shy of his 94th birthday. I had already theoretically started classes for my final semester of graduate school, although actually what had happened was it was my first day of going onto campus for class. I had gotten up early because I didn't know what the bus's situation was, and I had a 9 a.m. And I see a text from my dad being like, are you free to call? And I knew at that point. We all kind of knew. So the first day I actually had classes was when my grandfather passed. I tried to do good and sent a last first day of school photo. I'd sent it on that Monday because he passed on a Tuesday. And I just remember the next morning after that, I'd felt hungover. I had cried so much, I'd felt hungover. And I still just had to kind of keep powering through, get through school, go fly out to Wyoming, handle the coordination on some of that, and get back. The only saving grace was I got back on a Sunday, and that Monday I didn't have to do anything, so I could just kind of sit there. But I don't think I didn't process things for a while because I was still in classes. And I just felt guilty because in all of it, I'd been so obsessed with my maternal grandfather, like, because I'd wanted to know him so badly, that I didn't appreciate all the time I'd gotten with my paternal grandpa. Because, yeah, he was always around. He was such a beloved, like, he was the glue that held the family together. Everybody loved him so much. Although you wouldn't get to sit by the stories at his 90th birthday party. But yeah, he and my grandma had been married for well over 6 years at that point. I think they were at 63, 64 years. And I think about the fact that he did not spend a day in the hospital the entire time he was married to my grandma until he was put on hospice. And that is the kind of relationship I'd want. You guys had seen what had happened when my maternal grandfather passed. He had been sick for a long time. He had dementia, and it was getting bad towards the end. And part of it was COVID, part of it was just a slow decline. Yeah. I had gone to visit him at one point, actually that summer before he broke in his hip. Of like 2021. And I don't think he recognized me. I'll be honest, I don't think he did. He didn't have context for who I was. We decided a while back that I would not go visit him. Like, I had to be careful, really, with how I was going to visit him because I was using his car, and he'd always been very protective of it. He'd given me permission to use it, but my uncle and my mom were worried that if I was to show up and he would see the car, that he would want to leave and drive the car. But he was not allowed to drive because he had had too many accidents at that point due to the dementia. So like that had kind of limited my ability to visit him. Or I had to be, like I said, I had to be strategic. But you always also had to show up with your chocolate milkshake. He insisted on having his chocolate milkshake, so we sat quietly and drank chocolate milkshakes. And I think about it because also that project I worked on for my PhD involved materials that were replacing materials that he had worked on because he had been Navy his entire life and worked at the Pentagon twice. He'd done 2 different tours at the Pentagon. That last time he worked at the Pentagon, he worked on depleted uranium, and my work was like replacements for it, which I thought was so cool when we found that. You guys saw he passed in 2023 from, I think, congestive heart failure. He'd had a laundry list, and it took a lot because with his passing, it was kind of they had to also finally handle some of the last bits of how my grandmother's estate had been done, just like due to the fact that my grandmother's estate was helping with my grandfather, and my maternal grandmother came from kind of a socialite family. Like, my mom recounts the story of how there had been a mix-up with my grandfather's pay one time early on when they'd gotten married and he was out at sea and his pay had gotten messed up. But my grandma was able to survive off of the trust from the mobile homes that they had. Like, her family had a mobile home park in Florida. So to other Swedes from Florida, hi! there's like a specific family. If you write the name in the comments, and I'll like it if it's the family name, and be like, yes, I'm from that family tree. They were originally from Chicago, but then most moved to Florida. And my grandmother, her sister, and that side, both of her sisters, I think, moved to Florida, actually. I should mention also in all of this, my maternal grandmother's side, the women have not had a lot of longevity, honestly. Humorously, though, for me, I've had 3 grandparents make it to 93. And with my maternal grandfather, the thing that was really rough was he was going to be buried in Arlington. That was where my grandmother was buried because it was the local like military cemetery for them. And so she was buried there, and my grandfather was going to be buried there too. Like, that was at least one thing. We never had to ask that question. We even had the tombstone ready to go, or headstone ready to go, because like it was already engraved. Always threw me off when we'd go to visit her, because I would see his name too. It ended up taking 18 months for us to go to hold the funeral. It was full honors. The only thing that we were missing were the horses, but that was because the horses apparently had not been taken care of properly. So, but besides that, we had everybody there, and it was full honors with the band and a 21 gun salute. And we got the flag, which it's apparently larger than the typical flag that you get. That was something my mother realized. Also, they decided to give us all the shells, but they didn't have a bag or anything, so I just had to throw it in my purse because she was handing it to my mother. And like, the coordinator was a very lovely woman, but she was handing it to my mother. Where my grandparents are buried is on a slope. And at this point, my mother is in her like 70, and just like, it was not a like gentle slope. It was like quite steep. So if you're just kind of surviving at this point, because also in all of this funeral situation, we'd had my graduation from graduate school and then took a week-long drive to get to the funeral. Maybe it was like, yeah, it was an interesting time. But we had the like funeral because also in all of this, like, timing was weird, and yeah. But because also they were saying, oh, you have to be here at a certain time, and turns out you couldn't show up early, which my family tried to keep pushing it earlier and earlier. And yeah, I was getting yelled at just because I was there and I was the easy person to get yelled at. But I knew everybody else was more stressed, so it was easy for somebody to take it out on. That funeral, it was lovely. It was hard, but it was good. I know one of my baby cousins had recorded the entire thing. My mom had been like, they didn't play Eternal Father, and it's like, they did, but she was focused on other things, and reasonably so. Because also in all of it, because I was driving with my mother and she was the oldest, we ended up being the first car. And in some ways I felt like I shouldn't have been there in the first car. I felt like it should have been my uncle who coordinated all of this. Because also turns out Arlington, based off of their charter, only organizes things with the oldest child unless it has been delegated by the oldest child to whoever else. So yeah, I was having to sign things to be like, yes, I've witnessed my mother sign this document saying that like my uncle can handle this. Like, I didn't feel like I was, there were people that had much closer relationships with them, and I felt like they deserved to be in a higher spot of honor in all of this. I also still think of it, they moved the choke cherry tree. Like, that was one of those things where we got to the spot and none of us felt like it was correct. But because in the meantime, between when my mom had gone back or both my parents had gone back in 2022, because they realized that, hey, the choke cherry tree branches are moving the headstone. So they had moved it slightly. There was other choke cherry trees around, but not that one. The only reason we remember it is because my grandpa had pointed it out. And my grandma hated choke cherries. It was a good thing she never knew where exactly she got buried. Choke cherries. I associate those with my grandparents. Because my grandma on my dad's side would make choke cherry syrup because there was choke cherries in the backyard of the house in Cheyenne and sent it to us. It's mostly sugar, but like, it was just part of the family. And my dad would put it on the boysenberry syrup jars. So my sisters would think they were getting boysenberry syrup, but it was actually choke cherry, which isn't bad, it's just not what you expect. I associate choke cherries with my grandparents. Multiple times since 2021, when my grandpa on my dad's side passed away, I went back to Cheyenne to visit my grandma, who was she was an amazing grandma. She was so soft. And she was always trying to give you money like it was a drug deal, honestly. She loved to travel, and she would joke every time they were planning to do a renovation on the house, they instead went on a trip. And so they just got to see all over the world. I still remember how guilty she had felt that she couldn't make it out to my high school graduation, which had been a hard thing for me because those grandparents had made it to all the other grandkids' graduation, but by the time I was graduating, my grandpa was 89. My grandma was not much younger, and so it didn't make sense. And I went out to visit her by myself one time, and in March this year, I had gone. I knew that time was the last time. She was not doing well, and it's hard. And I'm not going to say that she was exactly healthy, but honestly, she was pretty healthy. The only medication she ever took was for her glaucoma, which she got in her 50s, or she started to develop in her 50s. She was pretty active. It was one of those things for her to suddenly become a lot frailer was really hard to see, because I just thought she would just keep on going. I just always did. While we were in Kentucky going to DC for the graduation and then the funeral, she was put on hospice. Once we got back to California, only a couple days later, my dad was flying out again to be with his mother. We all knew it was the end. She kept on going apparently a couple of times. My cousins who lived in the area said that they had gone to say goodbye about 3 times before she finally passed, and they had the funeral pretty quickly. That was within 2 weeks. I was at 2 funerals. Like, my sister had not planned on my nibbling wearing the same funeral outfit twice in a very short period of time. But we got us all out there to to Wyoming. That one's hard just because it was the end of kind of an era. I got to see my grandma's twin sister. They're fraternal, so like that was be different. I also did kind of I thought about it in the fact that, like, with my paternal grandmother, she was the 3rd youngest, and just generally of my grandparents, and also was the 3rd youngest in terms of age. My maternal grandmother was the youngest of all my grandparents. She passed first and kind of the youngest. But with my paternal grandfather, he died 2 days shy of his 94th birthday. My maternal grandfather died 1 day shy of his 93rd and a half birthday. And I double checked this. But my paternal grandmother passed 2 days shy of her 93rd and a half birthday. With my grandmother passing, again, that really reminded me about the times. I recently was reading the book about, like, the 5 types of wealth that the author talks about. Maybe you've only got like 15 more visits with your parents left if they're like 60 and you only visit them once a year. And I definitely felt that with the grandparents. With some of them, I didn't know it was going to be the last time. I was trying to be willfully ignorant that it could be the last time. Like, the last time I saw my maternal grandfather, it was not one of his good days. And that was not the reason I decided not to ever go visit him again. I mostly just usually went and visited when my mother or my uncle would go with me. And that was the last time my mom had seen her dad too. But at some points, I got annoyed because it felt unfair that my cousins got so much more time, both just in terms of sometimes they were living closer by, so they got to see their our grandparents more, but also a lot of them were older. Especially my dad's side, the closest cousin in age to me is still 7 years older. They got so many more memories than I did. I felt jealous. It was hard because I wish I knew. I wish I could have been there more, but it happened. And like, I consider myself almost lucky because with my baby cousins on my mom's side, they had 2 of their grandparents had already passed before they were born, and then they lost 2 of their other grandparents within a calendar year. They did also have the effectively another grandma who was my aunt's stepmom who'd always stepped in and been a very doting parent. But I really think of cherishing. While I've been here, I don't have anything from my paternal grandfather here with me in Belgium. And that is just because the only item I have of his is this Hawaiian shirt, which I love. He only wore it once. Him and my grandma had matching. She had a muumuu, he had the Hawaiian shirt. He only wore it the one time. Probably barely fit him. Of my maternal grandmother's, I've got a couple of her shirts. Like this one right here is one of her shirts that my mom had. She never really wore it, but she's like, it should fit you, so go for it. And I liked her style. I'm also effectively built like both my grandmothers. They were both German women. So yeah, I got those built, that build. And then my grandma on my dad's side had a bunch of these jackets. This was one of her favorites. She had a bunch also that had these prints on them. And apparently, even while she was dying, she had asked for the catalog. There was a lot of them, so a lot of the grandkids got one of these jackets, and I brought mine with me here. And for my maternal grandfather, besides my car, which I've become more protective of since he passed, I also have one of his shirts here with me. I'm not going to show it because it has his initials on it, which I joke is my alias because previously the car that I had his initials as a license plate, which was awkward because I shared no initials with him since he was my mother's father. But yeah, I wanted to talk about our grandparents because it's been a rough year when it comes to that. I've had to mourn a lot. This is also probably the first time I've cried in a while. I didn't mean to do all this. I had a feeling I was gonna cry. But it's the holidays and grandparents are a big thing, and I got to I've spent Christmases with both sets of grandparents. With my maternal grandmother, we visited her for my first Christmas, and it was her last, and I went back with my mother a couple of times to help take care of my grandma, probably more to just kind of act as a distraction while my mom was helping my grandfather, like with some just the caretaking aspect of it. For everybody who still has grandparents around, please spend more time with them. You don't know how much time left you have, and at this point in time, I can still hear the grandparents that I knew. I can still hear their voices. I still think about them. I still look at the photos of myself with them. I miss them. Miss them a lot. Please cherish them. Editing this is gonna be like, okay, cut out the crying, sniffling. Okay, cut out the crying, sniffling.
It was 8 minutes of crying.
Well, I know this was a bit of a downer for Vlogmas, but I thought it would be something different to talk about. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I promise not every single video is me crying. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!